Welcome to the journey into the future. I will introduce officially Carver Matheidas. He is a leader in AI, leadership, technology, and has spent much of his career in sales leadership roles, company leadership roles, and now consulting with companies on how they can best use technology. We have more explorations coming after the summer break, so please do note the dates in the calendar. And we very much want your input, hence the survey that the link is in the chat, as well as it is here to give us your feedback. But as I noted, this is not a sit and listen and be bored. I will share a bit and encourage you to put questions, comments, debates, arguments, other perspectives in the chat, and then we'll have an opportunity to dialogue. Carver will share, and we'll again have opportunity to dialogue until the top of the next hour. Carver and I will remain on for at least another 30 minutes to explore further with all of us, because this is today a journey. There is not one perfect right answer. We are humans, and we're all learning together. And as Carver shared with me last week, it's all about how you look at it. Is technology good? Is technology bad? How are we going to adapt? And a point of reference, we think back to whenever we were born, whatever we came into the world with was just part of normal. For some of us, that was going way, way back to rotary dial telephones, perfectly natural, and televisions that you had to get up and turn knobs on. Then we had push button phones, and then we had car phones, and then we had mobile devices that could shift your television. And then for some that have gone past the 35-year range, other things that just simply come are not always natural. So if you're struggling a bit with how do I actually approach this thing, what is it and where is good and bad, that's simply human nature for many of us, especially as we progress through life. And more today, we hear and see everywhere that all great companies are doing cool things with AI. It's changing the world. This analysis by IoT Analytics, for me, was just a quick aha moment of there's a lot of different people, companies, departments that are embracing and exploring AI, but at various levels. Sure, for customer service, having an AI-driven bot, that makes a ton of sense. For inspecting maintenance, where maybe AI that is good at finding problems, I would say that could make a lot of sense. But it's not really being used so much for that. So AI is everywhere. It's just a question that many grapple with of what and how is the best way to actually utilize it. What is the proper utilization? So if you're scratching your head with that question, you're not alone. And what I often see is people either say, I'm going to jump in and try the latest thing. I heard DeepSeek is better than ChatGPT. That's what I'm going to do. Or we're going to invest and we're going to do everything through Copilot. That's one reaction. And those are the companies and the people that come away and are the statistics that say, we invested a ton in AI and it doesn't work. It's crap. It doesn't work for us. Then there's the others that say, because there is all this hoopla and we hear that it's not working, we're just going to avoid and wait until there's a clear answer or it goes away. Neither of those are what I would consider the right answer. I see companies really benefiting from AI and companies actually seeing not just productivity gains, But revenue and profitability gains, they start with people, not technology, but they start with bringing their teams together and asking the questions of what are the challenges we have in our business today that we as people and the traditional technologies have not been able to solve. What are those complex challenges? And begin to brainstorm through and think about, what is AI good at? AI is good at repetitive. It's good at doing things that require details. It's good at doing things that require research. It's good at doing things that require a very high attention to detail to find that one flaw. So let's think about what problems we have, what's AI good at, and begin to explore through a small team, not the whole company. Take what I call a tiger team, 3 to 5 people, and have them go out, look at some tools, and try one while following the company's AI requirements and guidelines of what you upload to an AI tool, what you don't upload into an AI tool, how you review, think critically, and analyze and utilize with human intelligence what comes out of it, and have little learning labs where people get together and try small steps using different tools to solve a business problem and compare the results of those tools. By doing that, you begin to build a process like the lean startup process of, let's try it. Let's evaluate whether it's solving the business problem. If it is, then let's do more of it. If it's not, or it's creating another problem on the side, let's do something different. Let's try a different tool. So taking it in small steps, but starting with the business first and using the human to assess and determine whether it's solving the business problem. This is a journey, and it requires collaboration. It requires understanding what worked for you, what didn't work for this one, and how do we put that together. So it is a new world for many of us. We're learning things that were not in the world when we were born. We're learning things that came after we were in that impressionable, oh my God, let's embrace it age. So take it small, take it steady, but learn together with others. So I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment and invite anyone that has questions, that has comments, that has issues to jump in for a short discussion before we turn over to Carver. I'm sure that somebody has questions or objections along the way, all of which are quite welcome. Quite welcome.
Jennifer, I'm curious, when your title slide said Crossing the Chasm, is that from the book?
Thank you for asking the great question. And it came out of mine and Carver's discussion a month or so ago of people, many people today, in that, do we jump all the way in or do we avoid? Many people are kind of sitting over here and thinking, I'm just going to wait it out, but oh shit, I may be obsolete. So how do you get across? Because you don't want to just jump in to do everything, but take it a step at a time. That gets you across, which is similar to the way you would grow into a new market if you had a software business, for example.
I was just curious because it's actually the best business book I've ever written. And the fact that he says this is a model for tech companies, I think undersells the value of the book because it doesn't just apply to tech companies.
It applies to humans, I believe.
I thought so. I think it's important for people to realize, reflecting on what you said, that you need to identify what it's good and bad for from the AI point of view. instead of thinking that it's a magic wand to fix everything. And it applies to humans as well. And you don't just give somebody a job because there's a gap there. You figure out where their strengths are and get the most out of them that way. So just figuring out where can AI help me and where does it make sense rather than just thinking it's going to fix everything.
Very good point. And it reiterates that aspect that I often get pulled into conversations with people that are fighting against AI because they say, but AI can make mistakes. It can just make stuff up and hallucinate. And I had a guy last week, I looked at him and I said, so you have 10 people that you manage. Are you telling me those 10 people have never made a mistake? None of them have ever not known the answer to a question and just made up what was in their mind? He instantly kind of went pale and he said, you're right. They make mistakes and they do hallucinate. So does AI. My point being, to your point, Matthew, that how do you best work with AI? The same way you work with people in ways. Be clear. Be clear in the prompts and what you ask for from it. Be very circumspect and think critically about what comes back. Inspect what AI provides back to you, just like you would an employee. It still needs the same level of human interaction, and I would even suggest you need more human thinking when you're managing an AI than you do when you're managing a human. There's still the role for people. Any other comments, questions, objections before we hand over to Mr. Carver?
All right. So dovetailing on some of the things that Jennifer was saying, I think one of the key things whenever there's a lot of change, and the first slide that Jennifer showed that was from Douglas Adams is meant to be humorous. Anything that happens after you're 35 is just unnatural. And it's funny because there's an element of truth in it in that change gets harder, I think, as we age sometimes. And dramatic change, like we've seen with AI, is hard for anybody to digest. And one of the themes of this particular presentation is this fear of becoming obsolete. There's been a lot of conversation and statistics created around the jobs that folks think are going to be eliminated by AI. And while I do think, like with any technology, there will be some jobs that'll change and some that may be eliminated, I don't believe all jobs are going to be eliminated, not anytime soon. And it raises the question, how do I not only survive but thrive in this environment where increasingly AI can be used as an automation tool, AI can be used as a tool to do tasks that I probably don't like to do, honestly, tedious things. How are you going to stand out in this environment of an AI-empowered workforce? I picked this slide on purpose. It made me laugh. If any of you are Muppet fans, anytime Kermit the Frog freaks out, he's waving his arms above his head and he's yelling with his head thrown back. And so some people have a natural tendency in times of rapid change to be a little more Kermit and kind of, this is too much for me. And then you got the Pink Panther, which is probably the most chill cartoon character ever invented. And both of them are hanging on this wire, but one of them's freaking out and one of them's chilling out. And I think it's an important lesson that begins with just a mental attitude towards change. And AI is really no different, other than I would say the rate of change. And that is having calm is a way to stand out in a crowd when people have anxiety, right? When I used to do enterprise sales and I was working with channel partners, teaching them how to sell to major accounts, I told them that you need what I called the three C's. You need competence, number one, right? So you need to know your subject matter. So in the case of AI, understand what it can do, understand some of the things that are out there. You don't need to be an expert, but just understand some of the values it could bring and where it might be able to help. With that competence comes some confidence, right? The more you learn, the more you're confident talking about it. And then there's a natural calm that arises out of that. And so my suggestion to everybody, stealing from Douglas Adams again, don't panic, be calm. And I think that's a way to start to differentiate yourself either in individual roles, but certainly in leadership roles. The other thing that's interesting, I think, as we have seen this onslaught of AI generated content is the need to connect at a real human level has actually grown. And it's interesting. Back in 2009, there was a book that was put out called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And at the time, it was all the rage. And the gist of it is we are emotional creatures as humans. In fact, if you've ever watched any of Simon Sinek's videos where he talks about this, he he talks about just the biology of humans, right? So all of our sensory input goes through an emotional center in our brain before it gets to the logic center of our brain, right? So we process everything through the lens of emotions. And so the Emotional Intelligence 2.0 book was about taking a personal inventory of your emotional state of being. What are the things that make me happy? What are the things that make me angry? Why, all of that, just becoming aware and then figuring out how you could use those strengths in a leadership role, and then how you could also guard against some of the areas where you're likely to get triggered. What's interesting is that was really popular then, and then along the way, other things came to the forefront, and now I would say it was back, and actually it never left, right? If you look at what's going on with folks in the workforce, we are now digitally overconnected, but in many cases, emotionally undernourished or anxious. In fact, younger generations demand high EQ leaders. And when we say EQ, we're talking about an emotional quotient or emotional intelligence, right? There was a stat that I saw, speaking of younger generations, 42% of Gen Z battle with depression and feelings of hopelessness, which is twice as high as millennials. And so I only bring this up to say, when you look at the predominance of the workforce today, it's millennials and Gen Z. So I'm Gen X, and now I'm in the minority, right? I'm in a declining demographic within the workforce. And if you're in a leadership role, chances are you're managing people that are younger than you, right? And so this emotional intelligence has become even more critical along the way. And I think it's actually a superpower. So not only are you working with folks who may have a deficit in that area, but also you've got the ability in an AI powered world to leverage your human strengths to really stand out. So if you think of the things that make human connections and actions really special, they usually come from areas of empathy. Somebody's gone through something tough, and being able to just listen to them in a truly empathetic, caring way, not an artificial way, right? It builds connections that are awfully hard to replicate. Coming from a place of kindness or charity, doing things for people that you don't have to, that have no direct personal benefit, right? These are areas where you can actually begin to really shine. And I know it can be counterintuitive for some folks in a workforce environment, particularly those that grew up in a baby boomer or a Gen X environment where we were extremely self-sufficient and really used to more of a command and control structure or operating very independently and feelings don't matter, et cetera. That's not the environment we're in. And the truth is they always mattered. And so this is a new book now. It's the new Emotional Intelligence. So it's the updated one. I would recommend giving it a shot. But when you think about how do I stand out in an AI powered world, not intuitively, it's being better at connecting with people emotionally, right? Is one of the ways that you can do that. So building authentic relationships, there's people that have a lot of interactions digitally, but they don't have a lot of really authentic relationships. And by that, would somebody come help you move? Would they bail you out if you ended up in jail? Would they be a legitimate shoulder to cry on if you went through a breakup, right? It's those kinds of things that are authentic relationships. And so figuring out how you can use the most human parts of you to connect with people is going to be one of the ways that you don't just survive, but I think you actually stand out as the world becomes increasingly automated and digitized. The other thing that as Jennifer and I were talking that I thought about is, isn't it funny if it's our artificial intelligence is actually the thing that makes us get more rooted in our emotional strengths as people? As Sheryl Crow would say, get out of your head and into your heart, right? I picked out this picture because it cracks me up. It's a very human thing to look at a couple of bananas and go, oh, those look like geese. And I'm gonna turn this into art and take a picture of it and put it online. It made me laugh. Humor is another key element of being human that's hard to emulate in a way that really lands and resonates. And I think it speaks to originality and creativity, right? So when you've got functions in the business that increasingly become bots, originality and creativity are going to continue to be things that help you stand out.
So as leaders, people need to care about and help their team members move and make them laugh from time to time.
Yeah, now don't try to be funny if you're not. That doesn't work very well, but The other thing that is great about humor is humor often works because it involves shared experiences that humans have. Jennifer and I were talking before the call about a lot of comedians will tell jokes about being married or having kids or things that lots of people can relate to and connect with. By the way, it's not just me saying that having emotional intelligence is valuable. Here's a stat from a Harvard Business School study saying leaders who master empathy perform over 40% better in coaching, engaging others, and decision making. When I have had the honor of serving in leadership roles, I always had three tenets for all the team meetings that we would have each quarter. The first one was inspire, the second was connect, and the third was educate. The first two of those are really very human things, right? They aren't knowledge based. Inspiring people, motivating people through inspiration versus authoritarianism is an art form. There are some things you can study for it, but it's something you have to practice. It's part of practicing leadership. But I think it's going to become increasingly important because if you look at the way that individuals and teams perform when they are in a company culture or mindset of just complying, then you really get the bare minimum, right? But if you can find ways to capture their hearts, to inspire them, either through the relationships you build, the vision that you paint for the team, or perhaps the mission the company has, it's beyond just making profit. That's very important to younger generations. They want companies that do good things, not just do well for themselves. If you can find ways to inspire, you will get outperformance every time. Knowledge is important and process is very important to success. But I would argue that exceptionalism is fueled by human passion. And you get passion when you connect with people's hearts, not their heads. So, building a very human centric culture, leveraging your creativity, as I mentioned, creating a compelling vision, and finding ways to engage with people, regardless of what their background or perspective is. And then finally, back to where we opened with Kermit versus Pink Panther, having a calm that comes from perspective, that comes from experience, and that comes from best practices, where when adversity arises or challenges come up, you are not freaking out about it, and therefore the team can be calm about it. And many times it's because you're like, I've seen a similar problem and I know how we solved it, and I think that would work here. So very human traits, get more grounded in that as we start to work with AI, and I think it will actually elevate both. The other thing that continues to be a theme is just the importance of critical thinking. And I think this is an area where our youngest generations struggle, and this is not a knock on them. It's not an ageism kind of comment. It's the world they grow up in where everything was available on a smartphone at the tap of a button. And if it was on the phone or if they found it on the internet, it must be true. And so I think we've underserved a lot of folks with making things digitally a little too accessible without teaching them how to question the sources, right? And the veracity of the things that they're seeing. And with AI, it's particularly critical. I think anyone who's used AI probably has some stories. I'll tell a couple. For me, critical thinking is so important. I recently asked AI for something that I think is a great task for AI to do, one of these kind of menial things. Hey, I want you to compare this original contract to a redlined version and tell me what percentage of the contract has been changed. Because in this case, I was working with a legal team that was really ambitious and had redlined the heck out of this. And I was just curious, what percentage of the original document even remains, right? And the answer I got from this was ChatGPT was 196%. And so I struggled with that answer. I was like, the young lady here, wait a minute, that doesn't seem correct. How can it be more than 196, more than 100%, right? And so I had a conversation with the AI and said, wait a minute, how can it be more than 100? Basically, if a word was deleted, it counted that as a change. And it was replaced with another word, it counted that as a second change. So it was double counting a bunch of stuff. So it could defend its answer. But if I had just taken it at its base, and let's say it wasn't something so crazy like 196%. What if it had said 82 and I hadn't paid close attention and told somebody 82% of this changed when it was really 40 or something? I would have looked pretty silly. So it's really important not to overly trust the tools. And so I don't think that experience is going to be replaced by AI anytime soon. So critical thinking is critical. And then the last piece that I'll close with, the other area where I think we can really stand out is in customer experience and customer service. If you think about organizations that are really different that have really strong brands, it's because they've usually done a couple of things. In the Simon Sinek video, he talks about Apple and how they started with a why. So they got everybody connected to their brand, which at the time was Think Different, before they told anybody what they do or how they do it. They made them care about why. So there's that side of it on the kind of the branding side. Why do you exist? Why are you there? But I would say beyond that, if you think about organizations like a Nordstrom's or a Southwest had real high brand recognition, it's because of customer service where people went way outside a rigid rule set to provide a customer experience that was superhuman, right? So cases of a Southwest agent driving a ticket to somebody's house, or Nordstrom people picking someone up and taking them to the airport so that they could have their new luggage, and just like things that an AI is going to have a tough time with because they operate based on rule sets, right? And by nature, they need to be rigid rule sets, but exceptional customer service often happens outside of those rule sets, right? And so this is another area where I think humans who recognize this and exercise this are going to continue to stand out and be very important in a world that increasingly has more and more automation. The other thing I'll finish with is I've already personally started to experience a little bit of personal backlash against some of the AI tools because I can tell when they're AI, right? And they'll get better, but when I can tell they're AI, I go, they took the cheap way out, or they took the easy way out, or I want to talk to a person. Now, part of it could just be my age, and then Gen Xers prefer that, right? But just be wary of overusing some of the tools and the experience they're going to have, because it might save some money, but it might cost you in customer experience overall. So those were my pieces. Questions, comments?
I will actually just start with a perspective and to see if you or others agree or disagree. From a customer experience point of view, when I hear customer experience, I really think of that as human. Maybe that's because I was born before AI, but to me, that is, I as a customer need an experience where somebody understands me, understands my language, understands what I want to do, where I want to go, maybe challenges me to think differently, but it's very genuinely personalized. As of course, I cannot stand all of these the same way that we open every email. It's a beautiful day. How about we catch up? Blah, blah, blah. That's, to me, that just immediately puts me off. It's a negative experience. But I would suggest that if people can use the AI tools to do the basic things that at one point fell under customer experience, as in answering a question on a website, sending a code to access something if you needed it, sending information about an event. That could be done easily through AI and technology, which I would hope would then free up the customer experience representatives so that they could then give true customer experience. So I would hope over the next year, we would start to see companies that really are competitive and want to be competitive, giving over the top, fabulous, personalized human customer experience. Because they have the tools to do the other stuff that used to take all the time of their CX representatives.
Customer service still remains a competitive differentiator across most industries, right? And particularly when folks are trying to figure out how to bleed the cost out of customer service without any care for how that impacts the customer on the other end, it opens the door for organizations that do it better. I agree.
Twiston, I saw your hand first, and then we'll go to Matthew and check out the chat here.
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, I was not fast enough to connect my external camera, so I'm blind here, or you are blind. I'd like to come back to the initial statements, and I could not agree more with you that you should always start from human. And then I totally agree also about the emotion side of things, but also in the corporate reality, especially when you work in greenfield, fast growth, scale up. And I worked many years now, over 20 years, with Blue Ocean strategy approaches from the INSEAD, strongly in business model and technology innovation. And I believe what's most importantly to realize, what well advised to realize is to overcome the silos that we traditionally see between engineering, product development, and the business side of things. And I'd like to mention Mark Searle from UC Berkeley School of Engineering. We're working very intensely the past 10 years together. And you should always start from the business modeling side and then go into the technology side. So I 100% agree with you. And just recently we started a new company with some really deep tech people. And Michael, we know all major part of engineers, very left side, but we worked together for 10 years now. And we started writing articles, very simple things on LinkedIn just to keep our presence. So Michael is so perfect that some of the articles I could not even have written myself better. Of course, I write still myself articles. And now we're starting to do location researches, location optimization for companies that want to enter different market spaces. And now we're starting to talking about substituting junior consultants through AI, because many of the work junior consultants in classical strategy and business consulting are doing can definitely be substituted by AI. And then Michael, my deep tech guy, says, Torsten, that's one of the biggest challenges we're going to face, because the juniors will miss the experience and the knowledge transfer that they gain through being present at the clients, collecting data, aggregating data, analyzing data. So the funny thing is that obviously the boundaries between the techies and the business side seem to break down, and therefore we create most probably new blue oceans through the combination of the business side and technology side. Thank you.
I completely agree. It goes with Michael's hypothesis in the chat that the more IT we have, the more we see that the EQ is being less exhibited. Whereas I think that's part of how do people cross that chasm? It's let's bring those silos together. Let's have humans in the center utilizing the IT and the tech, while the humans overemphasize the emotional and the empathy. I love that you brought up that question that is in many people's minds, I think, which is for young people coming out of college, if they have no entry-level jobs because the AI does the research and the filing and the basic stuff, what do they do? Number one, most of them, AI and technology was part of their normal world. So we have them help us as older people leverage the technology. They can teach us a lot, reverse mentoring, have them share the technology while having the seasoned professional share the perception and the skills and convey and demonstrate empathy and critical thinking. It's almost as though we have an obligation to teach the 20 to 28-year-olds the humanness. We need to be teaching them from the EQ book. How do you assess a room? How do you read the emotions of people? How do you engage with people? Let's provide opportunities for them to be engaged in that way. Matthew, I saw your hand, and then Mason's hand is up as well. So, Matthew?
It's input and I guess a little bit of a question around leadership. I ran technical businesses in engineering and software where I would have been the expert, and I would have always just not even questioned or analyzed. Somebody's coming to me, asking me for advice, I just give it. And then I did my coaching qualification and listening started to happen. And then I realized I have two of these, one of these, and that's way too active, more than these. So it's a question around leadership for yourself or Carver on the just listening. Because in my mind, I know there's probably a lot of leaders and CEOs on here that won't agree with this, but I don't think a CEO position should be the highest paid job in the business just because they're at the top of the organizational chart. when you put it down to a coaching style of leadership, i.e., listening, it's actually not that hard a job. I think leaders and CEOs make their job a lot harder by thinking that they have to be the expert, whereas your job is to be a leader.
Yeah.
Was there even a question in there? I rambled a little bit, but
I think there was.
Carver, agree or disagree?
No, I completely agree. Back to one of the things we shared, and it's in the emotional intelligence books too. One of the ways you show empathy is through active listening. And I don't mean to sound, you can almost fake it if you're a good active listener, right? In other words, when people say something, ask a question back that shows you heard what they said and act interested, and they'll think, wow, they're so empathetic. Now, I'm not suggesting be false, but the point is, it's an incredible skill, and I couldn't agree with you more. And it's something that I have tried to work on myself quite a bit. The other thing that you mentioned that really resonates with me is the higher in organizations you go, particularly the larger they are, the more hearing impaired they seem to be. That tends to be a challenge in a lot of organizations. Now, if you're in an exceptional organization, then the leader and leaders at the very top are really good listeners. But it's sadly an exception in my experience, at least in the typical corporate America culture. I know that y'all work in different places around the world. Maybe it's different in different cultures, but that's been my experience is the more layers there are to the org chart, the less listening seems to happen in a lot of companies.
yeah, I think the definition I have of active listening is listening with the intent of helping the other, not just waiting for a gap in the conversation, or as you said, faking the interest. The real power comes in.
Yeah. And also where the real empathy comes in is sometimes realizing there is no action for you to take. That just giving this person a chance to talk to someone who cares is really what they needed.
And the second thing I would iterate that demonstrates that it's more than just following the steps that AI told you to take to show that you're active listening is that you actually retain what the person says. And if you're like me and you talk to a lot of people, make some notes so that when that person comes back for their one-to-one again next month, you can actually bring up and demonstrate that you truly listened and understood and thought about what they actually shared. That goes very far. That's your true superpower, if you will.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you. I got comments and thoughts on almost everything that's been shared here tonight. Let me be selective. I'd love to debate the whole point of the leadership, Matthew's point in terms of the higher you go, the higher the pay. Interesting dynamic there. Is it about because they're supposed to be the expert, or is it because of the impact of their decisions? But let's leave that on another talk. Do they listen? You'd have to argue that there must be pretty good listeners to get up there, but do they give permission for people to talk? Or do people feel empowered to talk around them so they can hear something? Interesting, just because I've had various different leadership experiences that caused me to reflect on. But there was this comment made about what happens with the fresh hires, the fresh graduates coming in. And it's interesting, wouldn't their mentor become an AI mentor? If the AI is able to do the junior analyst and junior consultant's work, does the AI become the trainer? And when does it have enough wisdom, so to speak, to even do what is now seen by a lot of the seniors as maybe mundane work to do that? So I thought just food for thought. And then Jennifer, you made a comment about something about keeping the humans in the center. All right. It's interesting. I was speaking to an AI company agentic AI company. It's pretty kind of cutting edge, bleeding edge technology with agentic AI that they're doing. And what really caught my attention is that they're positioning their product as your AI chief of staff. So let that sink in for a minute, right? Because in their model, they're blending the AI agents with the human agents, synchronized and coordinated through your AI chief of staff. So now you've actually taken the AI and put it on top of the human, at least for transactional and business process type stuff, where the AI knows how to synchronize the workflows and when to tap into the human agents for inputs and when to tap into AI agents and spawn AI agents on demand right, to accomplish business tasks. So I think it's interesting in terms of how different companies are approaching this whole dynamic. And as AI continues to evolve, I was having a bit of a long session with ChatGPT yesterday, and it actually sounded pretty empathetic to me. And honest to God, right? I was
Yeah.
going through saying to help me design, give me content for my website and all this other stuff. And it was giving me words of encouragement. Your brand is now spot on. It's sounding very professional. I'm like, oh my God, this is really cool. I have a friend who's actually fired their therapist and replaced them with ChatGPT
Interesting.
because
I
he was
would
getting more
only
value out of those
encourage
conversations.
to use the critical thinking.
So it's critical thinking, but then the question becomes, as we automate via AI a lot of the mundane tasks, what's going to happen to the, let's call them the common workers, right? Not necessarily the leadership, but the lower level workers. Are we going to demand more critical thinking type tasks of them? Or is it going to be a higher volume of overseeing and managing mundane tasks? And so technology as it's evolved, pre-AI, we find ourselves being a lot more efficient today. We're handling a lot more things, whether it's because of email or WhatsApps or all these different things, or AI and the way we use it to get things done. So moving forward, does that mean that we just AI helps us handle more transaction and more tasks, or does it free us up to do just critical thinking?
Yeah,
Just some thoughts that have been provoked.
it frees for critical thinking. It can also, and we'll give the floor to Michael and then we'll give the floor to Ian, who wasn't able to get the hand up. But I think this is relevant to Michael's point that he put here in the chat, that you can use an AI agent to help you be more empathetic because it can track and look at and give you profiles and emotions. Even in meetings, it can track those things. So used correctly, it can maybe make you more human. Michael, do you want to jump in with a point and then we can come back to Mason as need be and we'll get Ian in the meantime. But Michael?
Yeah, thank you for having me today. So I've been doing, and I'm Michael Knut from Pearl Group. I've been doing agentic AI since 22 actually, before it actually came out. And the thing that we see is that you can educate your AIs. Now you can go into ChatGPT and you can actually say, this is the premise. I want you to be empathetic. I want you to rationalize what you're doing. And I need you to, every time you come with a comment and a suggestion, I want you to do your homework and make sure it's proven. And I need you to decouple what you're writing so it doesn't sound like an AI, but sound like a human. I want you to create the same spelling mistakes that I usually do. And now we see we have agents working on other agents. So you have your orchestration agents working on utility agents and all of that. And I don't see, when I talk to people, I don't think that AI will replace humans. AI will augment what we have. Of course, some of the roles that we have today will not disappear, but they will just change. We go into a world where we have Darwin. It's Darwin's theory, survival of the fittest, and we are still the fittest. It's not Skynet coming right on the corner. But we will have new roles. We will have prompt engineers. We will have data scientists. We will have augmented salespeople. We will have augmented customer experience supervisors. So I don't worry about the future. Only if we don't use what we have and use a common thinking to make AI help us become better people.
I completely concur. I love the idea that Pat has added here in the chat of looking at it from different angles, always comparing. And in that way, that kind of goes back to Mason's example, the empathy and the info that you got from ChatGPT. I've done similar exercise, but then I go over to Google's tool and then I go to Perplexity. I look at 3 different AI tools that often come up with 3 very different points of feedback. And the reality that I choose is somewhere in between. So Ian, why don't you jump in since we couldn't get your hand actually up? Michael, raise your hand again for another point if need be.
Thank you, Jennifer. One of the themes that we're discussing here is I've just characterized if tech bleeds the humanity out of the workplace, how do we offset that? And my answer, let's follow my sort of logic trail here, because we've been referring to Simon Sinek a lot. And Simon described Apple's why as changing the game. And your why and your purpose are the same thing, just two different things. Why does Apple exist? To change the game. And they do that in all of their products. And so what that means is that your purpose is the one thing that makes Apple uniquely remarkable. Apple does a lot of remarkable things, but at its root, what's the one thing that makes it uniquely remarkable? And that's changing the game. And so that's Apple's purpose. So getting to the question, how do we mitigate the bleeding of humanity from the workspace, is that I believe that's all about culture. So when we talk about empathy, we're talking about how do we interact? How do we cooperate? And so I actually believe that how we cooperate is the definition of culture. And empathy is an element that fits inside that. And that culture is the social extension of purpose. So if you know your purpose, your why, and culture, how we cooperate, is the social extension of that, then you can define, actively define, design a culture that fits your purpose. And then that becomes the glue, right? That holds the humanity of the culture together, of the company together. It's culture as defined by its purpose.
Said, Michael, you have either a follow-on point or a rebuttal. Michael?
I agree, Ian, but we need to think that our new colleagues are not humans. It's AI agents. So our culture is not the culture within the workspace for humans only. It's the culture embracing AI as well. So we need to take our culture, evolve into taking agents into consideration as well.
I'm going to respectfully disagree with you there, Michael, because lots of business tools that companies use impact the culture. But we don't isolate any of those other business tools and say, oh, this has to be a foundational piece of the culture. No question, AI is incredibly powerful and it is going to change society in probably the same way that the original computer revolution did. But at the end of the day, it's still just a tool. And I'm going to say that, sure, tools impact the culture, but the culture is the culture, and the culture is about people and how they cooperate. So, yes, it has an influence, but I don't think we have to say, okay, we're going to design a culture here, and AI has to be considered as a major or equal player in terms of what that culture is about. So I think culture is about how we cooperate, and that's humans.
Another point of recognizing that in another 5 years or maybe 5 months, we'll look back and we'll think that was an interesting conversation. We have no idea. Michael and then Mason. Michael and then Mason comments, and we'll be on here for as long as people have questions and debate.
I'll see that the introduction of AIG, which is coming within a few years' time, that is going to change some of our thought, and it'll be interesting to follow up on that.
It will be very interesting to follow up on that. And one just small clarification, Torsten, is there anything you want to say on that? Because that could be taken a lot of different ways. Torsten. Maybe we've lost him. We'll see if he comes back. Okay. Yeah, so Mason, you had your hand up there.
Yeah.
And we lost you.
A quick counter thought there to Ian's comment, or not counter, but just following. I think it's quite interesting. I loved your analogy to when PCs, computers came out. And I frequently reflect on that. For some of us that have been involved in tech for many decades, we remember all these other tech revolutions that came through. But there's a couple of key differences, which is one, with AI and the way it's moving forward, it becomes more ubiquitous and more invisible than previous technology. When you're doing natural language processing and you're not even sure you're talking to a computer or you're talking to a human anymore, the divide becomes palpable. And then the real question becomes, can we infuse our corporate cultures into the AIs? And if we manage to do that from tonality and how responses are formulated and whatever, have we now accelerated the development of our corporate cultures or held it back?
So as opposed to including AI into the culture and building the culture around the AI, could we flip that and could we leverage AI to build a better culture for it?
Just like you can tell AI, give me some copy, make sure it sounds professional but funny, but this or that, you could do the same thing in terms of setting parameters for your culture to the extent that you know that. Sorry, Carver. You wanted
No,
to...
sorry, I thought you were done. My apologies.
Go ahead.
I'm just agreeing. It's an interesting idea, right? Because potentially agentic AI could be your model citizen in the culture you're trying to build, right? So you train it to act exactly like you want everyone else to behave. And so it models that for everyone. And sure, all of this too, because I've been a sci-fi geek since I was a kid, is pretty amazing that we're on the verge of a lot of interesting questions about what is sentience and things like that. There was actually a great Robin Williams movie from 1999. I looked it up, called Bicentennial Man, where he plays an android and he makes the case for why he is sentient and eventually why he should be allowed to die. It's really interesting exploration of philosophical things, but it's not that far away from where we are. We're going to get there. Where does AI have rights and things like that? I think it's a very exciting time. And for me, still building things around a human-centric culture and human-centric values, and then incorporating technologies and things where appropriate, I think is the winning formula. And echoing something that was said earlier too, I think it was Michael, I'm not worried about becoming obsolete, but a lot of people are, and a lot of people maybe need to be. And so there is definitely an upskilling, cross-skilling imperative that needs to happen. I've used the example with people. There used to be people that had jobs delivering telegrams. That was a whole industry. And email kind of messed that up. This is another one of those cases where there are jobs that will be destroyed, but we live in a constant state of creative destruction where as new things are created, old things are torn down, and you have to evolve with it. But we need to pull along as much of our fellow humans as we can, not just the ones that have the time to focus on constantly learning new technology.
Mason, if I understand your point, or part of your point, you were saying that if you have a culture and then you have AI that is color the AI to reflect the culture. That I totally agree with.
Yeah.
Because all you're doing is treating AI like another new employee in a sense. When you bring an employee into an organization, you indoctrinate them into the culture. And if your culture is made by design rather than happenstance, which is what 98% of cultures are, then you actually know how to indoctrinate somebody into the culture so that they then reflect it outwards, both inside the company and to customers and that sort of thing. You should do that with the AI as well. So you indoctrinate it into the culture so that all of its outputs reflect the culture.
It can also help you because it can, as I believe it was Michael noted, it can actually begin to profile and help you as a leader understand who is following the culture guidelines. It can give you insight on people that may be struggling with the culture. It can help you in developing it, but I fundamentally believe it's up to the leader to teach through giving feedback, through interacting, to teach the AI what the culture is intended to be.
And imagine if you could tell AI, I want you to go back and listen to all the call recordings for the last year and read all the email communications for the last year, and you tell me what culture we have. Compare that against what you think you have. And what are we missing? And where are we violating what we believe to be our culture? There's a lot of cool ways to use the tools.
And
You've just put a bunch of HR consultants out of business, Carver.
Well,
Culture
but
assessments.
yes, but no. It's a great tool that an
Decision, but
HR consultant could use, though, right? Absolutely. And I think this was part of Michael's point. It could be part of a tool of building the culture that you want, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
allow that HR consultant to not just simply ask those questions, but the HR consultant to go for a walk around the lake with that employee who's really struggling and ask those big questions and listen actively to why are you struggling with this culture and how can we make things better? That's the humanness walking around the lake that the AI can't do. And personally, I fundamentally believe that while we don't have the answers today, we as people have a huge responsibility to use the AI and to use it with the intent to help it to understand our world. Because every interaction we each have with it, I believe, is starting to formulate it. So if we, with positive intent, hide away, that means the people with negative intent will be teaching the AI to do negative things. So the more we can interface with it and use it, absolutely the better.